Hello everybody and welcome back to the Jack Throttle Show. This is part 3 of my January Motorsport Preview Series, and today we are talking all things Formula E. After a dramatic season opener in Mexico, the series heads to the Saudi Arabian desert for its second and third rounds. This is everything you need to know about Season 9 of Formula E and all the storylines coming out of the young electric racing series. I'll let the intro music play, let's get started. Okay, so in terms of broad headlines for Formula E this year, the cars are faster, the driver lineups got stronger, and there's more sponsor participation throughout the series, and also some new brands coming in. So it's really a year of opportunity for the series as a whole, and for all the drivers involved to try and get their claim on the 2023 FIA ABB Formula E World Championship crown. It's a pretty intense series now. It's grown year on year and it's kind of always been quite experimental. The tracks they've gone to, they've made a lot of mistakes along the way, Formula E, but they're trying to grow every year and they're taking a lot of risks this year with a new technical package. Very, very different looking cars. If you haven't seen an image yet of what they look like, I'll put one on screen now, but they're really going for this kind of futuristic Batmobile kind of effect. And they've also done that a little bit with the noise. It's been a really common, easy criticism of Formula E to just say, well, it's boring, there's no noise, right? It's not hitting the same. Like we see even with these hybrid IMSA cars we spoke about at the Daytona 24-hour, the kind of washing machine powered Formula One cars that we've got now, we've been starting to lose that part of the noise. But Formula E, I do think this year has made a little bit of a jump and they're kind of trying to play into that jet engine sort of high-pitched whine without making it too boring. But what they can do to attract attention from motorsport fans around the world and even people that haven't really got any interest in motorsport is deliver some exciting racing and some exciting on-track moments is what everyone enjoys, no matter what noise the cars make. So round one was at Mexico City. It's part of the same infrastructure as where the Formula One grid takes place, but it's not exactly the same track layout. Again, I'll put a picture on screen now. We can compare the two. But obviously, the dynamics are very different. And with a Formula E track, you're not really looking to get the same things that you want out of a Formula One track because of the different dynamics of the cars. The main difference there being the decreased top speed of the Formula E cars, but also they're a lot thinner, they're a lot more nimble between those tight, twisty corners, so they can invent more overtaking opportunities there. Whereas a Formula One car, you need to set up those braking zones a bit more obviously. You know, we're seeing like down into turn one in Mexico, right? A lot of the overtaking in the race is either going to be weighted towards that DRS zone or that braking zone going into it because it's the most efficient place to overtake. But the goals with Formula E, I think, with these light and nimble cars is to expand where those overtaking zones can be. So you also have the altitude playing a role. It's, of course, the same altitude as the Formula One track. That's not something they can change, obviously, in between rounds. But that is affecting... Basically, it's making the top speed higher without managing that kind of downforce sacrifice as much. So it enables the team to run a car with lower drag while still maintaining some of that downforce. And that's what we saw in Formula One. We saw that with Formula E. And with these new 300 kilowatt cars, it's really critical that Formula E kind of delivers on this promise of having dramatic high-speed racing action. So it was a big test of these new regulations. And with overall Formula E's marketing message being kind of focused on innovation, delivering things that other series don't, both in terms of opportunities for the drivers and in terms of what the on-track racing looks like, it's critical when they kind of take these big swings with their promotion, their marketing, and their technical rules that they deliver, right? They have to deliver. If you're going to take that risk, you're going to design, if you're going to take that risk, you're going to design a whole new car, it better work, right? Because you're forcing these teams to put in all the effort to designing them. The teams are kind of putting all this effort into making the best versions they can get. The series promoters have a lot of pressure on them to make the right decisions when they're setting up what these rules are going to be and ultimately have those rules targeted at delivering better on-track overtaking, more exciting racing, and more of a shake-up, really, something that's going to be new and exciting for motorsport fans. If we're talking changes to Formula E, there was also a bit of a change with the logos, with the graphics, the sort of on-broadcast TV presentation has been updated for this year. I think they're doing that in the attempt to sell this kind of newness, this innovation, this recharge, reload, whatever you want to call it. For Formula E, it's important to deliver that visually with the kind of branding, the messaging, the logos, as well as the cars being different, the logos on the cars being different. All sorts of stuff is all focused on trying to get this image of change and progress and whatever through on Formula E. Of course, we've also got Formula E champion Nick De Vries joining Formula One this year, and that's going to be a big test of, well, if De Vries is able to succeed so well in Formula E like we saw him do. Obviously, he wasn't so much a dominant driver in Formula E, but definitely competitive near the front. And of course, he did get that title one year. It's really critical that if Formula E can show itself to be a site where good drivers can succeed and that transfer works out for De Vries, it's going to be kind of mutually beneficial, right? And more people might then see Formula E as that path to a Formula One development role, a Formula One reserve role, which is then, of course, what De Vries used to get his one opportunity at Monza to kind of sell himself to all the Formula One driver academies and really get back into the ladder that he'd left after winning Formula 2 and jumping across to Formula E. That kind of cross-manufacturer participation and the linking of all the series together, I think, touches on similar themes to the Daytona 24-hour video where you see all these different brands merging together. So we had Gen 3 testing for the Formula E cars in Valencia, and everyone was pretty optimistic. It looked like they were exciting on track. You know, the rears were a bit twitchy when you saw them drive. It makes drivers having to catch that oversteer, having to manage those kind of brakes and get everything lined up, I suppose. All the little parts and details that go into a good setup. It didn't seem like all the teams had got it right, which is a good thing for new regulations because then you're not going to have so many problems or development curves throughout the year. And it also wasn't particularly clear that there was a hierarchy that was going to be in place from the start of the year. It looked pretty close throughout the grid. And that's something that we actually saw emulated in the practice in Mexico too. In terms of new teams, we've got the Monaco Sports Group Maserati team taking over the Venturi team, and that's a really key sign for Maserati really trying to invent themselves or get themselves back in to the supercar brand and also the electric platform where if they can succeed with this, if we can see that Maserati logo near the front of a Formula E broadcast often, it's only going to kind of pay off, right? And it's a sign of their investment with this Monaco Sports Group capital that Formula E is still attractive to investors, right? We see a similar thing with McLaren now. With McLaren, I think Neom is the full sponsor of the team, but they're entering too, and they're looking to kind of get their name across motorsport like we've seen them do in IndyCar, like we've seen them do in Extreme E, and now Formula E. We also had some changes to the attack mode system. Now you're getting 4 minutes total that can be deployed either in a 2-2 deployment choice, so 2 minutes, a break, and then another 2 minutes on the next phase. Or the little strategy change for this year is that you can do it with a 1 minute and then a 3 minute block if you really want to. Now, it's an argument as to whether that had any real impact in Mexico. I think the truth is that it didn't really impact the race too much, but we might see that change throughout the year, particularly if they can get the placement of the attack mode zones in the perfect place where it's enough of a sacrifice to go get it and you can't go get it and then still maintain your position, right? Because it kind of defeats the whole point. You're meant to go offline, lose positions, then use that new power to get back up the positions. Speaking of powertrain, the cars overall have had a massive jump in power. So they've gone from a base 200 kilowatt, which then went up to 250 kilowatt in attack mode, to a base 300 kilowatt, now goes up to 350 kilowatts in attack mode, right? So if we want to talk maths, there's a little bit of maths going on there in how influential attack mode can be, because when you take a car from 200 to 250, that's a 25% increase in power. But if you take a 300 kilowatt car to 350 in attack mode, it's only a 16.6 recurring, or effectively 17% increase. So that, that marginal increase is actually lower with attack mode this year, which had some people a little bit worried as to how effective it could be. And then it enhances how important the correct placement is going to be as well. So the powertrain change, the aero change, lots of changes going in, and of course lots of changes on the driver and team side too. I think the best thing I could do to explain where everyone is, what color, crash suits everyone's wearing this year, I'm just going to steal the Formula E graphics and put those on screen now, hold them on there for a little bit, and you can see where the drivers have moved to, who's who, what color shirts everyone's got on this year. It seemed like from the first race that the Porsche teams, both the Porsche factory team and the customer team, had made a significant jump. We remember them winning with Pascal Wehrlein in Mexico last year, at the end of last year. It was super, super dramatic, and it was super clear that everyone was like, oh, wow, Porsche had seemed like they were underperforming for a while and then had come through with a great result towards the end of the year and have kept that momentum going through the off-season into the start this year. But yeah, with that aero change, as I spoke about, with the powertrain change and the sponsor attention, there's a lot going on in Formula E this year. And we also had a change in the broadcasting booth. Now, the connection between this show and Formula E is really driven by Jack Nicholls, who in the very, very early stages of this show, was kind enough to respond to my emails, to come on and to sit through a bit of a hodgepodge interview by me, to be honest. The specific story behind that day was that I'd booked time in the radio studio on campus. Now, I thought everything was going well. I had my big high-profile commentator coming on. I was really excited. I get to the radio station on campus at Lancaster, and they were like doing some construction or something in the room, so I couldn't go in. I couldn't use the studio. I'm like, oh crap, I'm going to be late for this important interview. He's one of the most high profile guests I'd had the chance to interview on the show. I'm like, crap. And then I go back to my apartment. I'm using my headphone mic and my webcam, which is even worse than the webcam I'm using now, if you can believe it. And Jack was kind enough to sit with me for like an hour and a quarter and to make a podcast that I'm still quite proud of in terms of the questions and the content of it, if the quality wasn't there. But anyway, Jack Nicholls, also another asterisk on that, is now joining WTF1. So we had a big shake-up at WTF1 with their presenter choices, then bringing in a whole new suite of young talent in the online F1 community. Jack Nicholls kind of headlining that as an older mentor figure for them, and a lead presenter on their flagship series is going to be critical. But my original point was that ex-driver Oliver Askew, he raced competitively in Formula E and all across categories around the world for the last few years, has joined the booth now. So he's taken over the sort of driver representative role from Dario Franchitti, who we spoke about with Jack and how great their partnership was. So that booth side change up is also adding quite a significant element to the changes of Formula E this year. It's always tricky with new commentators. How well do they mesh together? Are they going to get the humor and the pacing? And we actually, I'll put in, I suppose, a card link to that now. But we spoke about with Andrew Coley how that commentator chemistry can develop and how him and Jenny Gao with Extreme E have grown and kind of all the little tips and tricks they use behind the scenes to get that kind of rhythm, that humor, and that partnership going, and how critical that can be to how engaging a series can be to watch. So yeah, again, a year of massive change for Formula E, a big test of the regulations, of the fan retention. As with a lot of things, people might watch one race, but will they come back for the next race, right? Something like a great commentary team is exactly what will keep people coming back. So I think that's enough of a sort of preview look at it. Hopefully I can edit it down so we can get to the race results and the Saudi Arabia preview as quick as possible. So I'll cut now and we'll be back with a full detailed recap of exactly what went down in Mexico as we saw these new regulations tested for the first time. Okay, so at final practice in Mexico City, the top 12 in final practice were separated by only 0.3 of a second. You couldn't even imagine that in Formula One. It would be more like a second and a half in Formula One to have that kind of distance. There were closer grids this year, but for a first race, I can put up the practices in Bahrain of 2022, the first test of those big Formula One regulation changes. The gaps were nothing like as close as what we saw in Mexico City in Formula E. Qualifying format, we've got the dual battles, so you've got more of a general group qualifying, then that goes into a sort of knockout bracket where you're doing one-on-one laps, one behind the other. Winner goes through, winner goes through, winner goes through. You win 3 times in a row. Your duels, you take pole position. And it was Lucas di Grassi that did exactly that, the original champion of the first year of Formula E, someone who's taken part in every single year, seen all these different technical changes, managed to put it on pole for the first race of Generation 3 with these brand new cars, which is pretty cool. And the scene on the grid before the race was tense, right? I think everyone was excited, a bit nervous, but it was a good sign that kind of things were a lot more prepared than they were in Formula E. It felt, going back to kind of the season opening races from years in the past, there were times where it felt unprepared. It was like a tech startup almost, where everything was very rushed last minute and kind of scrambled together, putting out fires all over the place. Hopefully not literally, but you know what I mean. But with this one, it felt more professional. It felt more controlled. One thing that was really incredible just from the kind of wide shots that we got on the broadcast was just how busy it was, right? That baseball stadium section that we've got at the Mexico City racetrack, the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, I believe the full name is. Probably have a little box in the comments correcting me on that. But the baseball stadium that the track runs through, of course, we see that packed out in a little party zone in Formula One. And it was exactly like that in Formula E, which is the really cool thing. Mexico City really came out for Formula E and for their Formula E drivers, showing support and selling out, creating a really brilliant atmosphere. And I think, something that really added to the broadcast was just how busy it was and just how live the crowd were, right? Really, really cool. Alongside Degrassi on pole, in terms of the high-profile results from qualifying, there was also Jake Hughes starting in P3. He's coming off a lot of F3 and F2 success, making his debut in Formula E this year. He's looking to really impress some people, to turn some heads, and he did exactly that in his first qualifying session. The background behind Jake Hughes, he's age 28, which is actually the same age as Carlos Sainz Jr., but he's still kind of in this ladder system of junior FIA racing, which is quite interesting when you can see drivers much younger than him, much further progressed. But a big part of the reason for that is that Jake Hughes kind of lived this little dream that I think a lot of motorsport fans have in their head, right? So he was age 16. I'm going to kind of short story this. But age 16, he went to a friend's karting birthday party and was revealed basically to everyone there and the people working at the track. He's putting laps in and they're going, this kid's got some pace. Which I don't know if anyone who's ever been rental karting, you kind of have in your head that you're just going to get out there and smash it and you're going to find this unborn natural talent. And then the leader of the guy who runs the karting track's going to be like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. Complete old school UK office heads will remember the scene in which basically that exact thing is lied about happening by the IT guys in the UK office. There's a whole scene where he pretends to be this amazing Michael Schumacher-esque karting driver and that he got recruited. But Jake Hughes lived that story for real, and he's played that victory age 16 at his friend's birthday party all the way in to the Formula E grid and all the way in to some battles towards the front in his first ever race. Really, really exciting. With the overall power increase, we did see that play out in the race. I think even on camera and from the video footage that you can see the fans took at the circuit, right, from the stands, which is really where the views matter. The cars did look faster. They just looked more on the edge. It looked like they took more skill to drive. The reaction times you needed to drive a faster car are obviously better because you have less time to react. You're going at a higher overall speed. And it just seemed like that had delivered, right? That part of the regulations to just make the cars overall faster, make the racing more exciting. Faster is better in all motorsport, really, unless you're right at that top end where 210 versus 250 miles an hour, basically impossible to tell the difference. So you get massive kind of diminishing marginal returns there. But at the speed that Formula E is at the moment, increasing that is going to give you properly big returns in how exciting they look to be on track, really. Lap 1, the race gets underway. Robin Frijns is caught at a slow speed corner. He basically rams right up the backside of Norman Nato, coming in way too hot. Hard to anticipate. I think it was kind of a bit of a blockade situation at one of those tight, twisty chicanes where you've got a lot of cars in front. I'll throw up a few stills of his onboard camera. But you could see he was just coming at it too quickly. And the really terrible thing about that crash was that as he got to the scene of the accident, he wasn't able to get his hand off the steering wheel. So he goes right into the back of Nato's car and it instantly snaps his steering arm. And what that does, unfortunately, snap the steering wheel and his hand was still on that. So I think Frijns is now out of hospital, but he did break his hand in that crash, which is a relatively big injury for a racing driver. I mean, you can't drive with broken hands, and that's going to take some proper rehab. There was also British driver Sam Bird with the Jaguar team. He suffered a mechanical DNF, no fault of his own. Always something that can be expected at the first round of new series, but at the same time, always tricky to take, and something that's never really just the driver's fault is always going to be a tough thing psychologically to find yourself motivated, to get the mechanics motivated, to still take that on to the next race. So we had Frijns out, we had Sam Bird out. Lots of safety car restarts, bunching the pack up back together. As we always say, yellow flags bring more yellow flags. Safety cars bring safety cars. They say yellows bring yellows in America because they have no intermediary yellow flag process in IndyCar and NASCAR. It's just instant yellow flag means safety car. But effectively, that's what we saw. Some kind of repetitive bringing the pack back together. Some exciting racing, though. And there was a little bit of drama going in there, a little bit of jostling for position. There was actually an overtake for the lead where Jake Dennis, the eventual winner of the race, overtook Degrassi. And it was missed by the TV cameras. A really kind of like a Lance Stroll moment, right? Formula One fans will remember that one from Monaco, where the first exciting bit of drama from the race, and they're showing a replay of something else, and we miss it live. That's exactly what happened in Formula E, and it felt exactly like that Monaco race, really. But it was a good overtake, and it was Jake Dennis snatching that lead of the race in a Jake Dennis style way. People had counted him before the year as one of the drivers to watch, and it really seemed like he, by Formula E standards especially, was dominant. You rarely see races won by big margins in Formula E. It's much more something where, because you get so many yellow flags, because you get that bunching up effect, for a driver to significantly outpace everyone else and to get an overtake for the lead, to keep it through the attack mode phases, and to keep that lead all the way through the end of the race is a real skill and a real rarity in Formula E. And it was exactly that was done by Jake Dennis after his invisible overtake that was caught, or not caught, should we say, by the TV. Overall, it was a good show that the new cars could run close together. There was minimal kind of tyre overheating, but the shame with Formula E is that you still end up with this single file system because the corners come at you so quickly. You can't, that penalty by going offline, getting on the marbles, whatever, is such a big time sacrifice that it's never going to really end up in a successful move, and it's really tough. Edo Mortara had a big mid-corner oversteer moment at turn 1, completely by himself, span the rear round, little too fast mid-corner. Again, easily done. I'm not going to tell the guy how to drive. I'd be out. I wouldn't even be able to drive the car to the grid. But a tough accident for him to go out through the direct fault of your own. There was nothing coming out saying that it was anything the car had done. It was pure driver skill issue, which is really tough, and I'm sure tough for his confidence. We spoke about Porsche earlier and how they ended last year well, but overall it felt like a little bit they'd been underperforming relative to their investment, relative to the manufacturer and the scale that Porsche like to operate at, and just how great they normally are in GT classes and Le Mans, all those sorts of things. Porsche tend to run at the front, and they hadn't really been doing that in Formula E. But this year, it seems like we're seeing a turn in that, and it reminds me of the Ducatis in MotoGP, where you see not only the factory team, but also the customer teams doing so well. It's going to draw the eye of the other customer teams, and suddenly Porsche are going to have even more customers, more data for them, more power for the top team, and more Porsche logos on the grid is always a good thing for the branding. And that's exactly what we've seen with the Ducatis, right? I think there's at least 3 customer teams, each then running 2 bikes that have Ducati bikes. And then also you add that into the now title-winning Ducati big bike team, the factory team in MotoGP. The logos everywhere, and it made it really hard for Fabio Quartararo to compete last year when he was trying to overtake all these customer Ducatis, which obviously had their mindset on helping Bagnaia win that title. And we could see that take effect with Porsche this year if they're able to gain that kind of clout throughout the grid and be the main supplier to the customer teams, be the best supplier to the customer teams. It's going to help out their championship challenge because you're going to have more friends than allies, right? It's a good sign no matter what the category. So we also saw Di Grassi run a really good race. He burned up a lot of energy at the start, trying to defend against Dennis and then catch him back up. And 1% of energy, while it seems minor in your head, over the race distance, a 1%, even a 2% energy difference can make a massive difference to how a driver has to drive, to where they're able to take speed, and to where the other drivers effectively will have a speed advantage over them. And we saw with Di Grassi him trying to manage that and him doing a really good job at that. Really impressive for him, starting on pole, showing that he's got that speed in qualifying, taking that sacrifice and being kind of pulled into that low energy strategy because of Dennis's overall pace, not being able to defend against that. Di Grassi, not Ducati, came off pretty well overall. It was a great drive by him, and probably the energy management is really more of a technical thing that the teams need to work on. Jake Hughes ended up having a really solid debut drive, tested all his skills from attack to defense to energy management. He described it after the race as the hardest race he'd ever done, and he had a great back and forth with Andre Lotterer, who eventually got the position for P4, and we saw Jake Hughes drop down to P5 on the last lap. But overall, racing with someone like Lotterer in your first round, it's going to show you, jump in right at the deep end of aggressive Formula E style racing. And it was really impressive for Hughes. A great sign for his season. And hopefully, he could be a champion, right? You never know. He could be a dark horse pick for the championship. A debut championship is a pretty bold call, but we will see. Again, I said I'd show the top 10 on screen now. I'll show it. We saw Stoffel van Dorn, last year's champion, claim the final point in the top 10. As I mentioned, Dennis a long way out front. We had 5 added laps at the end because of the safety cars. Formula E, another little technical asterisk, switching over to lapped races this year as opposed to timed races, but still adding time on at the end because they have the ability to do that with their electric powertrain. If you have a safety car at the start, they're going to add the laps on at the end, which is ultimately, when you're only having 30 to 40 lap races, good for the fans that have paid to go there, right? They deserve to see a kind of minimum amount of racing. After Mexico, we head to the Saudi Arabian desert in Diriyah for a double header. On the 28th and the 29th of January, the end of the month, Formula E second and third rounds will get underway. And again, I'll show the street map on screen now. It's not at the same track that Formula One goes to, I think, because the track dynamics of the Jeddah Saudi Arabia Grand Prix track are really, really different. I think they would expose some of the weaknesses of the technical direction that Formula E's gone to in 2023. That lack of top speed, I think, even with these slightly or very much faster cars in Formula E, they would still look a bit silly around the Jeddah Corniche circuit, which we now know is one of the most exciting and dangerous tracks we have in Formula One. But the Diriyah Street track, big wiggly middle sector. Again, we might see that single file effect come in, but turns one and I think the final corner as well, good overtaking zones. Hopefully we'll get a great show of what these cars can do in a completely different track, right? There were more high-speed corners in Mexico. There's more slow speed and medium speed and kind of thin Monaco-type wiggly bits at the Diriyah track. It is a cool layout. It stands out in Formula E history. It's been a part of Formula E since 2018, which is more than you can say for most of the current Formula E tracks. We're going to Cape Town for the first time this year in Formula E Season 9. In terms of like biggest moments throughout the years, unfortunately for Saudi Arabia, it was played host to probably the biggest crash in Formula E history as Alex Lynn took this massive upside down flip. Again, I'll show a picture on screen if I can get it now. But he had like a little bit of contact and then he got that kind of Mark Webber effect or, Mark Webber has had it a bunch of times, right? He had it in Formula One, he had it in GT, where that car just kind of gets a little bit up in the air, but keeps accelerating and just flips back on itself. And one of the crashes it reminded me of was Colton Herta at Indy 500 practice. He had a very similar thing at much higher speed on an oval track, which was, by far one of the scariest crashes ever, really, at the 500. And Colton Herta just sent flying up into the air, a bit like what happened to Alex Lynn. But hopefully we'll get some dramatic stuff out of the Saudi Arabia rounds this year that aren't crashes. The doubleheader, both of them are going to be night street races, a bit like we see with Singapore in Formula One. It always makes for a good show of the liveries, the logos, and the photographers have a lot of fun with it because that lighting that you get from a floodlit track, those reflections, can show up really, really well on camera, and there'll be a lot of like marketing images that come from this one. Here are your current teams and point standings. As we spoke about Van Dorn, he's looking to kind of come back this year and to show that he's got the talent of basically to show that he has enough talent to be recruited to another series, right? Formula E, once you win it, once you get to the front, mainly it's then trying to sell yourself to another team, maybe something like Inter, something like WEC, that Van Dorn could participate in if he's able to show his class again this year. But I think I've got down everything on my notes. I'll try and get this down to around 25 minutes if I can, at maximum. And I hope I've got enough information out that gives you all you need to know about the 2023 Formula E season and particularly the rounds coming up in Saudi Arabia. We'll be covering all the action from them after it happens, what the results are, what the main storylines are. But for now, I'll let the outro music play. I'll say thank you very, very much for watching. Check out the other two episodes of this series if you haven't already. One of them is the WRC Rally Monte Carlo, taking place this weekend, and then the IMSA Daytona 24-hour taking place at the same time as the Diriyah Formula E race. So again, plenty going on in January. I will let the outro music play. I'll shut up because I've talked plenty this episode and I think it's time to go. So yeah, again, for the last time, thank you very much for watching.